What's going on, everybody? The AC just kicked on. It's very noisy. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Total Fight Mike. My name is Danny Gutierrez. Thank you so much for joining me again on this program. A lot has happened since we have last spoken. There have been two UFC events that we've actually gone through. Thankfully, there was the Wednesday fight, UFC Fight Night, and then there was the Saturday title fight, the flyweight title fight, and then this Saturday is going to be Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker. I'm sorry. So we're just going to get right into it, and here we go. So, Dan Ige was going up against Calvin Kattar, and that was a pretty interesting fight. It was a very high-stakes fight for both guys in the featherweight division. What had really happened was, throughout the course of Dan Ige's career, I guess he felt he'd been overlooked, and you can kind of hear that in all of the interviews that he's been asked. Dana doesn't think I'm the guy. Dana doesn't think I'm the killer. Well, I'm that killer, and I'm going to show him. And I'm kind of paraphrasing in the promos and everything. But Calvin Kattar is one of those guys who's very poised. He's very experienced, and he's very calm under the fire. So when that fight started, it was pretty interesting to see that Dan Ige was actually utilizing a lot of body shots to try and open up Calvin Kattar. But Calvin Kattar actually had a problem with his nose at the end of the second round, I believe. And in his corner, it actually sounded like Calvin Kattar's coaches had said something to him that actually got him to get going a little bit. So he did a really good job at keeping the center of the octagon throughout the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. He did a really good job at nullifying the offense of Dan Ige, because Dan Ige, he's a really low guy. I believe he's an orthodox striker. Give me 1 second here. I have his profile pulled up. Does not say. I do remember the majority of the fight being in an orthodox stance, but again, he was throwing some nasty lead hooks and rear hooks to the body. It was a really good fight, but Calvin Kattar was doing a really good job at keeping all of that away and nullifying all of that pressure from Dan Ige, and utilizing angles and utilizing straight punches and utilizing really superior boxing to just nullify the offense of a Calvin Kattar, or I'm sorry, of a Dan Ige. Excuse me. Calvin Kattar utilized his superior boxing to nullify the offense of Dan Ige. Sorry about that, folks. But regardless, it was one of the fights that took place on Fight Island, and it took place on a Wednesday night. Another good fight on the card was Tim Elliott versus Ryan Benoit. That was a very close fight. Cody Stamann, whose brother had just unfortunately passed away a couple weeks ago, he comes back. Came back against hold on 1 second. He came back against Brian Keller, the gentleman who's fought at 135. But that was a very close fight. I actually had Ryan Benoit slightly winning the fight, but not by much, but just by a little bit. But Tim Elliott's a longtime veteran, and he obviously did enough to warrant a decision win. But moving on to that following Saturday night, July 18th, where we had the flyweight title on the line, this time legitimately, and it was Deiveson Figueiredo, who missed weight last time, rematching against Joseph Benavidez, who did not miss weight but unfortunately lost the last time. And unfortunately, it looked like this was going to be the last time that he is ever going to fight for a title. Listen, if you can hear the TV in the background, I apologize. Here's the thing about Joseph Benavidez's career. He's one of those guys. He's one of the best fighters in the world to have never won a title. And it doesn't feel good saying it. It's unfortunate to see. But, regardless of all of that, he was always one of the best fighters in the world at 135 and 125. But if you look at all of his losses, with the exception of Sergio Pettis, the rest of his losses were all title fights. His two losses to Dominic Cruz, one of them was a title fight. One of them was not, the first time they met. And then the two losses to DJ, the loss to Sergio Pettis, and then the two losses to Deiveson Figueiredo. That's tough. That's really tough. When two of those fights were not title fights, but those two opponents would later go on to become champions, that's tough. That's really tough. And you know, Joseph Benavidez in his last fight, he looked really good against Deiveson Figueiredo, who'd missed weight. And then they clashed heads, and then some cuts opened up, and then Deiveson Figueiredo dropped him, and then just TKO'd him. But in this bout, it was pretty interesting. Benavidez kept circling to the right side of Figueiredo, and I didn't know if it was something that they saw in camp. I didn't know if it was something that, you know, they felt like they could get singles or engage in the clinch easier when circling to the right side of a Figueiredo, but Figueiredo was sizing him up with that right hand all night. It was money for him. It was money for him all night, and it only took the first round and back mount to finish Joseph Benavidez. Actually, Deiveson Figueiredo finished Joseph Benavidez in the first round in their rematch in the main event at UFC at 125 pounds for the title by a submission of rear naked choke. And this is the first time that Joseph Benavidez has been submitted in his entire UFC career, his entire actually mixed martial arts career. I guess Deiveson Figueiredo wanted that, feather in his cap. He very much wanted to be the first man to submit Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm sorry, Deiveson Figueiredo wanted to be the first man to stop Joseph Benavidez via submission, because Joseph Benavidez had trained with the Team Alpha Male guys, Uriah Faber, Chad Money Mendez. He was one of the three kings at 125 pounds, 135 pounds, and 145 pounds. They all had it at Team Alpha Male, the gym Team Alpha Male, or excuse me, Team Alpha as they like to be known now. But, you've seen guys like Cody Garbrandt's left, Cynthia Calvillo's left, Justin Buchholz has left, Joseph Benavidez has tried other gyms. He has spent a lot of time in Extreme Couture. It's tough. It's tough when you... I've never competed, but I can only imagine what it means to get to the top and then for all of your aspirations to just come crumbling down after all the hard work that you put in. And it isn't as if he isn't working hard. He's got 28 wins over 7 losses. If you weren't working hard, they'd be about even. Or he'd have more losses than wins. Records like that exist. Who knows? But Deiveson Figueiredo has tried his best to be the best, and unfortunately, he's only gotten that close, and close only gets you so far, unfortunately, in a sport like this. But Deiveson Figueiredo is your 125-pound champion. He's strong. He's got great jiu-jitsu. He's got great striking. He's accurate. And he's undefeated in the UFC. So, or no, he's not undefeated in the UFC. He's only got 1 loss in the UFC, I believe. Let me see. I believe he has. I believe he dropped one in the UFC. I forgot who. Yeah, it was Jussier Formiga. Okay. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ace who was one of the guys in the... or no, he was not one of the 4 in the tournament, but he would later go on to be a contender. Is still a contender. But, yeah, that was kind of an anticlimactic, historic set of events that transpired. I mean, good for Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm happy for him. I will keep watching him. I'm a fan. But if you've been a fan of Joseph Benavidez and you've been watching him for a long time, if you've been watching him, since his Dream days, I've been watching him since his WEC days. It's kind of tough. It's tough. So I can only imagine how Joseph Benavidez is feeling. There were other great fights on the card. The co-main event was phenomenal. It was pretty interesting. I use that word a lot, interesting, because mixed martial arts is phenomenally interesting. I believe it's more interesting than any other sport in the world. The co-main event was in the middleweight division. It was Jack Hermansson versus Calvin Gastelum, and it was basically to see who can get out of the rut at 185 pounds, because Jared Cannonier had defeated Jack Hermansson, and Calvin Gastelum was pretty much 0-2 coming into this fight. Listen, when it comes to this fight, Calvin Gastelum used to be at 170. He had trouble making the weight. A lot of people feel that he should still be at 170 because of his size and his height and everything. But, I mean, he's done well for himself at 185. Excuse me, guys. But, interestingly enough, sorry, guys, the TV in the living room is really loud. I have family watching television in the living room. But Calvin Gastelum actually came out guns a-blazing in this fight and dropped Jack Hermansson, and then Calvin Gastelum initiated in the guard of Jack Hermansson. And if you know anything about Jack Hermansson, he's a submission ace at 185 pounds. He submitted Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt David Branch. And David Branch was the WSOF champion at 185 pounds and light heavyweight. And he choked him out. He choked him out like it was nothing in the first round. He choked out a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt in the first round like it was nothing. And he got dropped in this fight from Calvin Gastelum. Calvin Gastelum engaged in the guard. And then Jack Hermansson, there was a scramble. Jack Hermansson was fishing for the legs. It looked like he got the leg, and then it looked like Calvin Gastelum was going to turn and slip out of the leg lock, but then he just cranked it over, and then submission by leg lock in just under a minute and 20 seconds. In the first round, Calvin Gastelum lost to Jack Hermansson. And that's 3 losses in a row for Calvin Gastelum. He had a war with Israel Adesanya, and then he had I'll say technical brawl. They didn't come out bloodied and bruised, but Darren Till and Calvin Gastelum had gone through a technical brawl. It was a technical chess match that Darren Till came on the top of, and because of that, he's in a main event this coming Saturday. But 3 losses in a row for Calvin Gastelum. Maybe see if he can actually discipline himself and get a nutritionist and see if he can actually drop down to 170. Who knows? 3 losses in a row. I mean, we've seen guys like Cowboy come back from worse. Good for Jack Hermansson. He gets back on the winning column. Maybe 2 or 3 fights away, or 2 or 3 wins away from a title shot. Who knows? But Calvin Gastelum has really got some work to do. It's interesting to see guys from 170 go up to 185, and you see guys who used to be 155 pounders like Jorge Masvidal go up to 170, and that pay off to guys like Michael Chiesa, for former adversaries at 155. It's good to see guys like that have success, but it's hard when you see somebody who's got so much potential like Calvin Gastelum, and for him to make a mistake like that, but all it takes is one little mistake in the sport of mixed martial arts. It sucks. I'm sure he's hurting real bad. Good for Jack Hermansson. I know he was on a winning streak before he met Jared Cannonier, who's the dark horse at 185 pounds. We'll see what happens after that. And how about Rafael Fiziev just taking Mark Jacasey to Muay Thai seminars throughout the first, second, and third round? My goodness. When Mark Jacasey threw that leg kick and then he just bent back out of it and dodged it and then returned with his own leg kick, that's high-level Muay Thai, man. That was awesome. That was phenomenal striking from Rafael Fiziev. Mark Chase started to come back at the end of the third round, but it was just too little, too late. But yeah, keep an eye on Rafael Fiziev. I know Murabek Taisimov was a guy, but he just lost to Diego Ferreira a year ago. Unfortunately, before all this happened, but yeah. So moving on to Robert Whittaker versus Darren Till. This card is stacked. This card is very stacked. Let's look at the last. Actually, looking at the card right now, Francisco Trinaldo's headlining the prelims. That's Francisco Trinaldo's a high-level kickboxer. He's a little older, but he's a little long in the tooth, but he's a high-level kickboxer coming out of Brazil. Alex Oliveira, the other cowboy, against Peter Sabata. That's going to be a great one. Paul Craig's coming back. Carlos Esparza and Marina Rodriguez. So I wanted to talk about these three fights. Fabricio Verdum is going up against a returning Alexander Gustafsson. Now, there's been some rumblings about a sparring session 10 years ago with Gustafsson and Travis Brown sparring against Fabricio Verdum. There's a whole bunch of stories and speculation, what have you. Apparently, Gustafsson got the better of Fabricio Verdum in a sparring session. Listen, you hear stories like that all the time. Is it true? Usually, more often than not, yeah. A lot of these guys spar with one another, but it's when they ever get paired up or matched up and it comes time to fight, what usually ends up happening is that they'll usually bring up stories like this, to try and hype up the fight. Whether those things really happened, I wasn't there. You weren't there. Unless you were, then, leave your comment down below and let me know what happened, what really happened. But this is going to be a great fight because Alexander Gustafsson he did everything that he could at 205, and he can't beat John Jones. He fought John Jones twice. He can't beat him. He fought his only other losses at 205 are to Phil Davis, who's in Bellator and is the former 205 champion in Bellator. He lost to Anthony Rumble Johnson, who anything he touches turns to dust because he's a freak of nature, and Anthony Smith, and that was a close fight that actually had Gustafsson winning, and then Anthony Smith made the proper adjustments, took him down, and choked him out. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt himself, but Gustafsson is known to have been having some pretty good takedown defense, if not grappling defense, because he'd actually trained with Phil Davis for a very long time after he had dropped his first loss to him. So, who knows? Fabricio Verdum, being the former UFC heavyweight champion, being the one who upset Fedor Emelianenko, being a former Pride veteran, this being his second stint in the UFC, him talking about leaving the UFC, he's in his 40s now. We're going to learn a lot from these two guys. Fabricio Verdum had that resurgence when he was at King's MMA with Master Rafael Cordero. Excuse me, and he really got to feel himself with that shoot the box style and capture the heavyweight championship in the UFC, and then he dropped it to Stipe Miocic, and then he hasn't really looked the same since then. He's been trying to get back to it. Who knows if he can get back to it at 40? Not everybody's Yoel Romero. Alexander Gustafsson isn't that much older. He's younger. In my opinion, I think he's got a little bit more pep in his step. He's no spring chicken, but I feel like he's as agile as one. If you could bear with me on the metaphor a little bit. But that's the third fight next to the co-main event. The co-main event is actually a former adversary of Alexander Gustafsson, Mauricio Shogun, who was having a third fight with Antonio Ruggiero Little Nog Nogueira, Minotauro Nogueira, former Pride veteran, former Olympic level boxer for Brazil. You know, unfortunately, he's been inconsistent with his UFC career. He was one of those dark horse guys that, against Tom Brills, he had that memorable fight with Tom Brills, and then after that, there wasn't very much for him after that. He had some wins and had some losses. One of the most devastating losses was to Anthony Rumble Johnson when he came back, and that was a devastating loss. He defeated Tito Ortiz, ground and pound in devastating fashion. But if you look at Mauricio Shogun Rua, his last fight against Paul Craig, he fought Tyson Pedro, but he didn't. If you look at both of these guys and look at them from their first fight and you look at them from their last fight, these guys are not the same. These guys are not the same fighters. Mauricio Shogun Rua is actually one of my favorite fighters. He's one of my favorite light heavyweights ever. And then somebody named John Jones came up and beat the crap out of him. And I've been watching John Jones since his fight with Stephan Bonnar. That was nuts. That was crazy because Stephan Bonnar, I have a Taekwondo background. I'm kind of biased because Stephan Bonnar has a Taekwondo black belt. I thought it was going to be a tough fight for John Jones at the time, and the rest, as they say, is history. Antonio Ruggiero Nogueira was one of those guys outside of the UFC that the UFC had always wanted, and it was always a question of what would happen if Little Nog was throwing down with the light heavyweights at 205 pounds in the UFC. We got that answer. Unfortunately, he never won a championship, and unfortunately, he put himself in fights that, if he were to win, would project him to title contention, but unfortunately he did not win those fights. Again, fights with Phil Davis and Anthony Rumble Johnson. But those guys are beasts. Those guys are monsters. Those guys would actually go on to fight each other later. Mauricio Shogun has had some very tough fights, to the point where if you look at him take punishment, you realize that he's very much trying to not get knocked out. He's trying to not get rocked. He's trying to not, destroy himself. I need to get a haircut, guys. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get the hair out of my face and out of my ears. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully I'll be a little more cleaned up next time you guys see me. But, Mauricio Shogun Rua and Antonio Ruggiero Nogueira, I'm going to watch it because I've been watching Shogun fight forever. But, man, this is a tough fight. This is a tough fight to watch. It'll be interesting, but this is a tough fight to watch. So, just ripping that Band-Aid off of the wound as quick as you can, and, just moving on to the main event, which is going to be awesome. It's a return fight for Robert Whittaker after losing to Israel Adesanya, losing his title to Israel Adesanya. Now, Israel Adesanya is the title holder at 185 pounds. Robert Whittaker is going to be taking on Darren Till. Now, at 185 pounds, Darren Till looked phenomenal against Calvin Gastelum. He looked, both southpaws, he looked phenomenal on his feet. He looked patient. He looked tactical. It was pretty interesting to hear that Darren Till had almost had a panic attack leading with the time leading up to the bout in the back room before the walkout. Excuse me, guys. Sorry about that. Which is pretty interesting because Darren Till's a beast. I have nothing but respect for Darren Till. His only losses are to two guys who, one was a former champion, the other was a title contender and the BMF champion, and Jorge Masvidal, the other guy being Tyron Woodley. Those are his only two losses, Darren Till's only two losses. They were at 170, and, at 185, Darren Till looks big, and he looked good, and he still looked light on his feet. Robert Whittaker, he's another one of those guys that used to be at 170, was killing him to make 170 pounds. He had actually lost to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and then actually moves up in weight and is undefeated at 185 pounds until he gets to until somebody named Israel Adesanya comes up and takes his title, or takes the title from him, and now proclaims himself as the best in the world at 185 pounds. So this is a high stakes fight. I would argue that this is a number one contendership fight. This is a title eliminator fight. They're both great strikers. Darren Till's dimensions, he's a little bit bigger than Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker's always been a shorter, stockier, 185 pound fighter, but with that, he is able to move well on his feet, and he's able to utilize superior angles and work his opponent's blind spots. He did that against Jacare. He did that against Derek Brunson. He did it against Uriah Hall. He did it against Yoram Romero twice. Robert Whittaker's been through the fire. Darren Till has been as well, but in this game, I apologize, folks. Calling mixed martial arts a game is like comparing apples to oranges, or oranges. Excuse me. George St. Pierre said it best. You play basketball, you play baseball, you play soccer, you play hockey, you don't play fighting. You don't play boxing, you don't play kickboxing, you don't play mixed martial arts, you don't play wrestling, you don't play jiu-jitsu, you just don't. There are different circumstances. But in this fight business, in this sport, you're only as good as your last outing. You're only as good as your last fight. And Robert Whittaker's taken a long time off. May have benefited him, but in his last fight, he was devastatingly knocked out. And he got dropped at the end of the first round, and he got dropped in the second round and was ultimately stopped. Robert Whittaker has got some work to do against Darren Till, and Darren Till has got some work to do against Robert Whittaker. We'll see who comes out the number one contender in this fight, unofficially, perhaps, who knows. Thank you. That wraps it up, actually, for this episode of the Total Fight Mike. If you can hear my dog outside the door. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you to my editor, Pat. I know his pinky's extremely sore. He just got the pins ripped out of his pinky, or surgically removed from his pinky, so he's trying to work that out as best as he can. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the possible sequel. Bye, everybody.